New South Wales, Iain Martin, the provost, right, to use the US-based language. And it comes full circle, because you remember when Jeff Young started us off, he talked about concerns of administrators, students, faculty, and policy groups. And you're going to summarize from the provost position, the administrator position, what your challenges are and how you're dealing with it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed. It's always a mixed blessing to go last. The first thing is you've heard everybody else, so you've got a context. The second is it's actually really quite hard to come up with anything new. So just about everything I'm going to say has been touched on in one way or another through this. So the first point I'd make is context is everything, and the view that you put on this from Provost, Chief Academic Officer, is heavily influenced by the kind of institution you are. So we are a public university. We're founded on science and engineering, but we have a large-scale humanities, law, business school as well, and we are a big institution. These are 2011 figures. That's up to nearly 53,000 students now. So we're a big institution. We work in the public sector, but we have about, I guess, 30% of our students are fee-paying international students. So we sort of blend public, private, engineering, and comprehensive. Our journey into sort of the MOOC world has actually been going on for a number of years without actually the institution realizing it. And probably 5 or 6 years ago, we decided that it was really good for the institution to engage with YouTube and put up short video clips of some of our best lecturers teaching about subjects that they're passionate about. So we've been doing that for 5 or 6 years now. We've built up a channel, and the number of hits is huge. The leader is a maths lecturer who teaches not maths for university students, but bridging maths for kids thinking about physics, engineering, science at university who are struggling with the quality of maths education in the high school. And I know that is a global issue. 6 to 7 minutes a clip, very, very rudimentary. He's now up to 2 million downloads personally, just for that very short series. Now, we didn't realize when this went up that actually we were sort of starting down a MOOC world. It's not quite built as a structure, but in fact, that's what we were doing. We then had a number of folks who were working on adaptive learning. This was how in a big university can you personalize the educational experience using technology to provide personalized interaction, personalized assessment. Smart Sparrow is the company that's been doing it with us. This is a spin out from the university. And again, we didn't quite realize where that was going. But we were encouraging, and I think this comes back to its having the environment where people feel that they can do this and experiment within the institution. And then last year, we had our first sort of formal MOOC put up. This again came from electrical engineering, but it wasn't done through one of the traditional platforms. They actually said, we want to, for all the same reasons that you were talking about, own our own platform. We want to understand the analytics. We want to understand how students interact. This went up. We were the first university in Australia to put a MOOC up. It sounds fantastic. The first that the president and I knew about we put a MOOC up was this press release. Which, again, is one of the challenges for being, if you encourage innovation, keeping the balance between institutional control and innovation is incredibly hard when you get into this space. So that's a little bit of the institutional background. So what about the core questions? So if you're thinking about MOOCs, number one is why you're doing it. There isn't one answer to that, but I really do think you need to understand why you're doing it before you start down that path. And I'll come back to all of these. How does it integrate with your common core business at the moment? If you're going to do it, how are you going to do it? What platform are you going to use? Can you take existing MOOCs and build them into your existing curriculum? And if so, how are you going to do it? This one has sort of been touched on in the edge in multiple talks, but I think is actually going to be an increasingly challenging issue for anybody who has my sort of role, is how on earth do you factor this in? It does not work in any of the standard metrics around thinking about what faculty do for the university. It's important, but it's dissociated directly from revenue in many circumstances, but there are revenue benefits for the institution, there are reputational benefits. It speaks to a kind of teaching and team teaching, which whilst in engineering, medicine and science is really the norm, in humanities it is most definitely not the norm and is really beginning to rattle some cages around what this means for the way we deliver teaching. What does it mean for the way you think about the campus? How you spend your money on campus investments going forward? I would be the first to agree that I don't think MOOCs threaten the standard campus-based undergraduate experience. But they will change the way that the students interact with the campus, they will change the student expectations, and they will change how we prioritise investment. And I'm not sure we've got that quite right yet either. And finally, if you're going to go down this new online world, how do you build it sustainably into a business model for a public university? Now, to give you some idea of what this means for our institution, we have an operating budget each year of about 1.6 billion Australian dollars, which is near enough the same in US dollars. Last week, we put our last year's financial statements up to our state parliament. The operating margin on that was $30 million, so about half a cent in the dollar. How do you build it into a public university budget where your margins are so narrow? And I know that's the case for just about any public university in any jurisdiction. So all of those are the challenges. I'm not saying I've got answers to all of them, but they're the questions that we're grappling with. My other point to start with is that we've talked about MOOCs being the disruptive force. I think MOOCs are a disruptive force, but I think they've been more disruptive than the technology actually means because of the time they've arrived at. They've been a catalyst for a lot of these questions. We're struggling with the challenges of mass higher education. When I started university in the late 70s, early 80s, in the UK, in Australia, in New Zealand, and I think in much of the United States, participation in university education was 10 to 12% from school leavers. We're now up in most of those jurisdictions to 40% plus. We are struggling with what that means for the economics of higher education. And MOOCs have been a touchstone for, can we afford all of this? The second thing is digital content is absolutely ubiquitous. Every one of our students now has a blended experience. There is not one student who will come to university and have a non-digital education in the way that would have been the norm 20 years ago. So every single person has a blended experience. It's just how blended that is. An interesting stat that I use, and this actually came from our librarian, so I think I believe it because it's pretty difficult for him to deny it. Last year alone, this is 12-month figures, our main student library, book loans were down 27%, but foot traffic through into the library to use it as a shared learning resource to access digital resources to do group study was up 30%. The world is changing around us and MOOCs have capitalised that. Now, I don't know how much this is truly global, but for us, a full-time, open quotes, close quote, residential student ain't a full-time, close quotes. They don't come to university on a Monday morning at 9 and stay till 5 on a Friday. They're in and out. Most of our students have part-time employment, and although I don't know for definite, I think probably they're participating about 60% of the time. So they're dipping in, they're dipping out, they're making use of different resources. And the final point I'd make in thinking about this from the point of a provost is that when I went to university, people hated group study. It was the worst punishment you could inflict on a group of high-achieving students was group study. Now they do it to themselves voluntarily. You walk into the library, they are engaged in group study, they're losing group learning, they're interacting in ways that we'd never imagined. So all of those are contexts into which MOOCs have been dumped. Technology is important. I'm not going to go through this slide, but it's just to make the point that our students are now engaging with technology in ways that are different to 5 years ago and absolutely radically different to 20 years ago. They don't, and this one is really important, well, these two I think, they expect technology to be there the whole time. It's not something that this is a technology-enabled bit of their curriculum and this is a non-technology enabled bit of their curriculum. Technology is just there for them. It blends imperceptibly with the experience. They don't expect IT to be the dominant feature of what they do, but when they have it, they want it, and they want it to work well and facilitate what they're doing. So it really has coloured the way we think about this. Now you might say, what's this got to do with MOOCs? Well, I think it's got everything to do with MOOCs. So firstly, how do you put MOOCs and a conventional curriculum together from an administrative point of view? Well, I think until very recently, we've had a very unipolar view of what we mean by blended learning. And again, it's come through in some of the talks that we've been talking about, on one end, the traditional campus-based experience, and on the other end, we've got an online experience. I think that unidimensional paradigm is wrong, and there's probably more than 2 dimensions. I apologise for this. This is the challenge of using Macs when you present on a PC. The fonts don't work sometimes. I think there are 2 parameters to this. We've got the learning environment, which might be campus-based or might be online. And we've got the enrolment and content, which might be open or it might be closed. And we've always had some of this. So, campus-based open. In the United Kingdom and elsewhere, there's been a long-standing history of opening up a university campus for effectively free, not for credit community education. This is where we've traditionally sat. We've had the Open University or equivalents delivering online or remotely delivered courses for many, many years. In the United Kingdom, the Open University was delivering television-based courses in the 1960s. It's not new. What MOOCs has done is filled in the 4th quadrant of this, which is the open content, open enrolment, online delivery. So it's the next part of an evolution of the environment in which we deliver education. And I think what that means for us as administrators is we've got a component here and we've got a component here. Instead of being an axis that's running that way, the axis is now running like that. And we're thinking about how do we balance out what we deliver in an open online environment with what we deliver more traditionally, but thinking about content, assessment, what goes in there, authenticated assessment, credentialing. And the challenge for us now is how we blend on that axis, not how we blend on that axis. So why are we doing it? I think this is really important. It stimulates innovation. There is no doubt that what happens in the MOOC and online world comes back and feeds quality back into your traditional delivery. Several speakers have spoken about that. Absolutely it does. The adaptive learning work that we've done is now fed back into our mainstream. It enables you to build brand, absolutely. Data analytics, I think, are the big untouched of all of this, and I think we're going to see more and more relevance placed on data analytics. I think the Coursera example, where a 5-minute experiment tells you a talking head alongside slides adds huge educational value, you'd never get that without analytics. So I think we're going to see more and more from that. The other thing I think we'll get from analytics, for those of us involved in a public sector institution with an equity and access mission, is to try and provide early flagging of students who are struggling, and I think we'll get better at that from the analytics. I think there is a component of widening access, but I am somewhat sceptical that MOOCs alone are enough to widen access. The usage figures suggest that this is by and large educated people seeking more education, not those who haven't had any education getting into education for the first time. I think it's got the capacity to do that, but I think we need to do a whole lot more work around how MOOCs work in that space. The final one I've put up here, I think I should put in italics with brackets around it, is generate revenue. I think as a provost, I am absolutely not expecting to see any revenue from MOOCs anytime soon in any of the current models we've got. It's there. I discourage our Board of Trustees from even thinking that there is a revenue line associated with this just at the moment. It's the other reasons we're doing it. So, if you're going to go down this path, how do you do it? And we've been through this debate, and in fact we're still going through this debate because we've started in one model and we're not sure we want to carry on in that model. And effectively there are 2 models. You can do in-house delivery with a standalone MOOC platform which you host, you modify, you build. Class to Go is the absolute classic example, but there are others. You can take your own learning management system and strip it right out to the core elemental basics, and I know people are doing that with Moodle to a limited extent to provide some open type MOOC type courses, and there are other solutions. The pluses about this approach is it gives you complete control of what you're about. You own all the data, you know exactly what's happening. The downsides are starting from scratch, it's slow, it's expensive, and you don't have the benefit of a global consortium to actually provide that group think and group learn going in, or you join a consortium. Everybody's had variations on this slide. There are others out there, but these are the big players at the moment. And as one of our other speakers said, I think watch the space on this one. It's the UK launching in August. And it's interesting because it's been built by the Open University, who are one of the world leaders in distance learning pedagogy. And they're building it from scratch pedagogically first, as opposed to technologically first. So I think I don't know where it will go, but I think it's going to shape things. How do you build things into your curriculum? What about credit? I don't have the answers to this. I think the talk that we had earlier on summarised things very, very nicely. But I don't know where credit goes. And I actually think there is a more fundamental question. Rather than credit, it's actually what is a degree? Is a degree a motley, unconnected group of courses linked together that provides you a body of knowledge that roughly addresses the body of knowledge that people think should be the equivalent of? Or is there a metastructure to it where there is overall an overarching added value in it that you can't quantify? And I think it's definitely the latter. And I think the work that needs to be done academically is actually what is a degree before we start talking about can we give MOOCs credit, or is a collection of MOOCs put together a degree. If you use an automobile analogy, the mere fact that you know Dunlop makes the best tyres and Bosch makes the best spark plugs does not give you the ability to build a car. In the same way, you might be able to pick up course 101 from a fantastic university and course 203 from another. Is that a car? Is it the degree? We don't know. I'll skip past that one. This one. What does it mean for faculty reward and recognition systems? How do you factor it into a promotion application? How do you factor it into a tenure application? We just simply don't know the answer to this, and I think as provosts we're going to have to spend a lot more time thinking about what this means. How do we quantify the value to the institution of being engaged in the development of online materials that have enormous financial benefit in the long run to the institution, but don't factor in this year or next year or the year beyond? What does it mean for being an individual academic? I touched on this in my opening. I think team teaching is one of the things that will come from MOOCs. We will see people using team teaching in really interesting and innovative ways. But when you throw that at your typical single teacher philosophy course, your typical single teacher aspect of law course, it really does challenge the established academic paradigms. And I don't have the answers to it, but I think we are going to have to spend a lot more time as academic leaders thinking about this particular question. Campus design infrastructure investment. Now, it might be dull as dishwater for many, many academics, but actually we're dealing with hundreds of millions of dollars for most big universities. Most universities are spending $100 to $200 million a year on their campus just to keep up to date with what they want to do. What does this mean for campus investment? Well, we're seeing some changes. Libraries have gone from that to this is our now the ground floor of our student library that once upon a time looked like that, now looks like that. The conspicuous absence is anything that remotely looks like a book. We're changing, but I'm not quite sure how far down the evolution we are changing. And I'm going to throw up an interesting analogy, and it's a little bit historical, but I like doing this. Where are we? That is the last of the T-clippers. These were the absolute epitome of the best possible design that you could get with an efficient, fast sailing ship to transport people and goods. Their lifespan was 20 years, not because they were not good at what they did, not because they didn't use the best of design, but because that thing came along, which is nowhere as near as sleek. That's the SS Great Britain, but there were many others at the same time. That reigned supreme until the Boeing 707 came along and we moved into mass airline transport, and that's a bit of gratuitous promotion for Sydney Harbour. But the question is, in terms of thinking about campus learning, the student environment, what we put on our campuses, in terms of that 150-year progression, where on that progression are we? What's next? What do we need to put onto the campuses to support a really high-quality undergraduate experience where digital engagement really matters to our students? I think it's just a question we have to throw down every time we think about a new building, every time we think about a new teaching space, every time we think about how we lay out the campus. So, what about the business model? If there's one thing that keeps me awake at night, it's the doom and gloom MOOC scenario that this is really going to disrupt undergraduate education. And it keeps me awake at night for two reasons. Firstly, because I don't quite know how we'd adapt to it. But the second reason it keeps me awake is the business model at most of the universities I've worked at looks a little bit like this. We have three missions: education, research, and sort of service and engagement. What's in black and what's in red is deliberately in black and deliberately in red, because essentially the revenue we bring as an institution from undergraduate education and postgraduate coursework enables us to do all of the rest. All of the rest brings in money, but it does not bring in enough money to provide the kind of environment that we need to have the best researchers, the best staff, and to provide the kind of environment that we need to do the mission that we want to do. So thinking about this is really challenging as a provost, because it wouldn't take very much to make this bit unviable if we start seeing the $10,000 Texas degree. So to wrap up, I think this is where we're at. We've moved the axis that way to that way. For the university, MOOCs are now just part of the reality. They are there, they're not going to go away, and they are going to continue to refine and enhance what we do. But what does it mean for the future? And I think my crystal ball is no better than the last speaker's crystal ball or anybody else's. I think the future is uncertain, and I think it's entirely unpredictable at the moment. But I think as academic leaders, that second quote is probably the most important thing that we can bear in mind, is don't try too hard to spend all the time envisaging the options, but make sure that the institution is nimble enough to respond to those future options. Thank you very much.
I think your last point is really telling, because if we do it every tub on its own bottom, every activity has
Yes.
to be self-supported, we're in trouble.
Yeah.
This is what technology does, is wring out the cross subsidies.
Yes. And that's fine if you can swap the cross subsidies for another source of funding. If you can't swap the cost subsidies for another sort of funding, it truly throws up. And our legislators are actually challenging the post-World War II status quo. So, like the United States, we've had a belief that publicly funded research-intensive universities where the funding stream pays for education and research is something that's important for the nation. They are now questioning that and saying, do we not need to, in a digital world, fund education for education's sake and research for research's sake, get rid of the cross-subsidy and have it open? Now that's fine if you deal with both of them at the same time. It's not so good if you deal with the education bit because you've got an acute budget crisis, but don't do with the research and industry engagement piece at the same time. We end up in big trouble. And that's my worry, is not that there's a problem with disentangling it, but if you disentangle it and you want to keep the capability, you'll do both at the same time.
Thank you.
Thank you.